Discipline is one of the greatest struggles of the human journey, and if you find yourself making sincere promises to change yet repeatedly slipping back into old habits, know in your heart that you are not weak, broken, or alone. This inner conflict has been faced by kings and warriors, saints and seekers, householders and renunciates alike, and even Arjuna, the mightiest archer of his time, stood on the battlefield of life paralyzed by doubt and confusion, overwhelmed by the restless pull of his own mind. And it is precisely in this universal struggle that Lord Krishna speaks to us, not with harsh commands or rigid rules, but with compassion, wisdom, and divine love that gently reshapes our willpower and transforms discipline from a burden into a sacred path. When we invoke Krishna's presence within our hearts, when we remember that divine consciousness dwells quietly within us, we begin to understand that discipline is not forceful control, but loving guidance, not punishment, but alignment, not suppression, but awakening. For discipline is the bridge between who we are and who we are meant to become, the quiet hand that leads us from chaos to clarity, from distraction to devotion, from restlessness to peace, and yet in a world overflowing with noise, instant gratification, and endless stimulation. This bridge can feel distant and fragile, even though deep within we already know the right actions: to rise early, to care for the body and mind, to speak truthfully and kindly, to act with purpose and integrity. Still the mind resists, wavers, and wanders. And Krishna, knowing this intimately, teaches us through stories and lived wisdom rather than judgment, as seen in the tender childhood episode in Vrindavan when Mother Yashoda tried to bind the young Krishna as discipline for stealing butter, only to find that no rope was ever enough, always falling 2 fingers short, until she surrendered with love and patience, at which moment Krishna allowed himself to be bound, revealing a profound truth that discipline born of love succeeds where force fails, that steady effort, infused with compassion, can tame even the wildest tendencies, and that when we approach our own minds with gentleness rather than anger, persistence rather than despair, transformation naturally unfolds. Krishna openly acknowledges that mastering the mind is one of the greatest challenges, affirming Arjuna's words that the mind is restless, turbulent, and difficult to restrain. Yet he reassures us that it can be conquered through constant practice and detachment, reminding us that discipline is not a single heroic act but a daily return, a humble recommitment made again and again. Even after failure, where practice means continuing despite imperfection and detachment, means releasing self-criticism and obsession with outcomes, trusting that every sincere effort carries us forward even when progress seems invisible. When we choose one small act of discipline, a few minutes of prayer, a moment of mindfulness, a conscious word of kindness, and commit to it with consistency rather than intensity, forgiving ourselves when we falter and beginning anew, we walk Krishna's path, which is gentle yet powerful, steady yet forgiving, and deeply rooted in grace. True discipline, Krishna teaches, is not merely control of the mind, but alignment of action with higher purpose. And through the path of karma yoga, he liberates us from the chains of anxiety by instructing us to act without attachment to results, reminding us that while we have the right to our actions, the fruits do not belong to us, and that freedom arises not from inaction or obsession with success, but from offering our efforts sincerely to the divine, just as Arjuna was urged to fight not for personal victory or gain, but as a sacred duty entrusted to him, leaving the outcome in Krishna's hands. And when we adopt this mindset in our own lives, whether in work, study, relationships, or service, discipline ceases to feel heavy and instead becomes a joyful offering, a daily prayer expressed through action. Krishna also cautions us against extremes, teaching that discipline flourishes only in balance, for one cannot become steady in yoga by eating too much or too little, sleeping excessively or depriving the body, overworking or escaping responsibility, and thus true discipline requires harmony between body, mind and spirit, where nourishment, rest, effort and reflection coexist in equilibrium. And when we honestly examine our routines and gently correct areas of excess or neglect, we discover that discipline is not about deprivation but about sustainable well-being and inner harmony. Beyond willpower, discipline is sustained by faith. Faith in Krishna's guidance, faith in the sacred process of growth, and faith in our own divine potential. And when the mind pulls us in countless directions, Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita serve as a timeless compass, reminding us that the mind can be our greatest ally or our greatest obstacle, and that elevation begins by befriending the mind rather than fighting it, training it with patience, compassion, and awareness until discipline flows naturally rather than through struggle. When discipline feels especially difficult, Krishna invites us to surrender, just as Draupadi did in her moment of utter helplessness when human effort failed and divine grace intervened, teaching us that surrender is not weakness but the highest strength, and that when we place our struggles, doubts, and repeated failures at Krishna's feet with sincerity, His grace lifts us beyond what our own determination could achieve. Transforming discipline into devotion, Krishna also reminds us of the immense power of the senses, which can carry away even the most discerning mind, and therefore discipline includes the sacred pause, the moment of awareness before reaction, where we withdraw from temptation like a tortoise drawing in its limbs, not through suppression but through wisdom, asking ourselves whether an action leads us closer to our higher self or further into bondage. And by repeatedly choosing the higher good in small moments, we gradually reclaim mastery over our inner world. Far from limiting freedom, Krishna teaches that true discipline is the gateway to liberation. For when we are no longer enslaved by impulses, habits, or external circumstances, we gain the freedom to choose consciously, to act with clarity and courage. Just as Arjuna emerged from despair into fearless action through disciplined devotion, and when we reflect honestly on areas of our own lives where lack of discipline has caused suffering, we can envision the freedom that mastery would bring and take one humble step toward that freedom today, trusting Krishna to walk beside us. Discipline, in Krishna's wisdom, is not a punishment but a gift, not a denial of joy, but a pathway to lasting peace, purpose, and fulfillment. And as we remember His teachings, to practice patiently, act sincerely without attachment, maintain balance, nurture faith, pause before temptation, and surrender with devotion, we realize that discipline infused with love becomes a source of joy rather than fear. And as we perform our duties, established in equanimity, remaining steady in success and failure alike, we embody yoga itself, allowing Krishna's wisdom to strengthen our hearts and guide our steps. And if these reflections stir something within you, let that inspiration blossom into engagement, devotion, and shared learning. For when we participate, reflect, and support the spread of wisdom in whatever way we can, through words, actions, or service, we keep the eternal flame of Dharma alive, walking together as a disciplined and devoted community guided by Krishna's timeless love and truth, always remembering that He is with us at every step of the path, gently guiding us home. Lord Krishna's wisdom remains eternally relevant, offering guidance not through fear or rigidity but through compassion, insight, and divine patience that awakens strength from within rather than imposing it from without. Krishna teaches us that discipline is not the crushing weight of obligation but the quiet alignment of intention and action, the sacred bridge that connects our present self to our highest potential. And while modern life floods us with distractions, quick pleasures, and endless demands on our attention, the longing for structure, peace, and purpose grows stronger within us, reminding us that true discipline is not about denial but about direction, not about control but about conscious choice. When we turn inward and invite Krishna's presence into our hearts, we begin to see that discipline guided by love becomes sustainable, gentle, and transformative. Much like the beautiful story from Krishna's childhood in Vrindavan, when Mother Yashoda attempted to bind him as correction for his playful mischief, only to discover that no rope could contain him until her effort softened into surrender and affection, revealing that discipline rooted in harshness never succeeds, but discipline nurtured through patience and devotion opens even the most stubborn doors, including the door to our own restless mind. Krishna openly acknowledges that the mind is powerful, unpredictable, and difficult to restrain, as Arjuna himself confessed, yet he assures us that mastery is possible through steady practice and detachment, emphasizing that discipline is not achieved through a single moment of determination but through repeated effort infused with forgiveness, where practice means showing up again even after failure and detachment means releasing self-judgment and obsession with immediate results, trusting that sincere effort is never wasted. When we commit to one small daily act, whether prayer, meditation, mindful speech, or conscious service, and perform it consistently without demanding perfection, discipline quietly takes root, growing stronger with time, and when we stumble, Krishna invites us not to quit but to begin again, for his path is one of grace rather than condemnation. True discipline, as Krishna reveals, extends beyond self-control and becomes an offering when aligned with the higher purpose, and through the path of karma yoga, he liberates us from anxiety by teaching that we are entitled to our actions but not to their fruits, encouraging us to act wholeheartedly while surrendering outcomes to the divine, a principle that transforms discipline from pressure into prayer, from fear into freedom, just as Arjuna was guided to rise from despair and fulfill his duty without attachment to victory or defeat. When we apply this wisdom to our own lives, our work, relationships, studies, and responsibilities, we discover that discipline becomes lighter when we focus on sincerity rather than success, effort rather than approval, presence rather than reward. Krishna also warns against extremes, teaching that discipline thrives in balance, for excessive indulgence weakens the will while harsh austerity exhausts the spirit, and therefore true discipline honors the body with nourishment, the mind with rest, and the soul with reflection, encouraging moderation in eating, sleeping, working, and resting, reminding us that harmony sustains progress far better than force. When we honestly observe our routines and gently restore balance where excess or neglect has crept in, discipline becomes an act of self-respect rather than self-punishment. Beyond habit and effort, Krishna emphasizes faith as the unseen foundation of discipline, faith in divine guidance, faith in gradual growth, and faith in the sacred potential within ourselves. And when the mind pulls us in countless directions, Krishna's teachings gently remind us that the mind can either elevate or degrade us depending on how we train it, and that discipline begins by befriending the mind, approaching it with understanding rather than hostility, guiding it patiently until obedience arises naturally rather than through struggle. In moments when discipline feels overwhelming, Krishna invites us to surrender, just as Draupadi surrendered completely when all human strength failed her, demonstrating that divine grace flows most powerfully when ego dissolves. And when we place our weaknesses, temptations, and repeated failures at Krishna's feet with humility, discipline transforms into devotion, sustained not by fear of failure but by love for the divine. Krishna also acknowledges the strength of the senses, warning that they can overpower even the wise, and therefore discipline requires awareness, the sacred pause before reaction, where we withdraw from harmful impulses like a tortoise drawing in its limbs, not through repression but through clarity, asking whether a choice leads us toward growth or bondage, and through repeated mindful decisions, we slowly reclaim sovereignty over our inner world. Many fear that discipline restricts freedom, yet Krishna teaches the opposite, revealing that true freedom arises only when we are no longer enslaved by habits, moods, or impulses, for self-discipline ignites inner liberation, allowing us to choose consciously rather than react blindly, just as Arjuna emerged from confusion into fearless clarity through disciplined surrender to Krishna's guidance. When we reflect on areas of our lives where lack of discipline has caused suffering, whether through procrastination, excess, anger, or neglect, we can imagine the peace and confidence that mastery would bring and take one small step toward that vision today, trusting Krishna's presence beside us. Discipline, in Krishna's wisdom, is not a punishment imposed from above, but a sacred gift that leads us toward joy, stability, and purpose. And as we integrate his teachings, patient practice, selfless action, balanced living, faithful surrender, mindful restraint, and loving persistence, we realize that discipline guided by devotion becomes effortless over time, and as we perform our duties with equanimity, unattached to success or failure, we enter the state of yoga itself, where life becomes a continuous offering. When these teachings inspire engagement, reflection, and shared learning, discipline extends beyond the individual and nourishes a collective spiritual journey, reminding us that supporting, sharing, and participating in the spread of wisdom through words, actions, or service is itself an act of discipline and devotion. And as we walk this path together, guided by Krishna's eternal wisdom, we learn that discipline is not about becoming rigid or perfect, but about becoming free, loving, balanced, and deeply aligned with the divine presence that gently leads us home.